They tossed him into a river as a newborn, expecting him to disappear forever. Instead, he crawled out of the water and carved his way into history as humanity's first emperor. He rose with no family, no kingdom, no name, only an unstoppable destiny stalking him from the shadows. Before we continue, subscribe. It helps us keep history's greatest stories alive. Long before the rise of Persia, before Babylon carved its name into stone, the world was a patchwork of warring city-states scattered across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Each city claimed its own gods, its own kings, and its own ambitions. They traded with each other, fought each other, and bowed to none but their own. It was a world carved into fragments, held together only by river water and ancient grudges. No one imagined it could ever be united. Yet in those fractured lands, a legend was stirring, not from a palace, but from a riverbank. The story of Sargon begins not with royalty, but with abandonment. The ancient tablets speak of a baby sealed inside a basket of pitch, set adrift upon the Euphrates by a mother who could not keep him. The river carried him away from death and toward destiny. He was found by a humble gardener, a man who tilled the soil of the king and raised the child as his own. From the very beginning, Sargon's life was shaped by survival, not privilege. He grew among the workers, learning the land, the rhythm of rivers, the weight of hardship. He was neither noble nor destined by blood, yet something in him set him apart. He listened when others hurried, observed when others ignored. He learned how people thought, how they fought, how they followed. Even as a boy, he moved with purpose, calm, watchful, waiting for a world he did not yet understand. And still he rose. When he came of age, Sargon entered the service of Urzababa, the king of Kish, a ruler with power, armies, and a whisper of fear in his heart. Court scribes later wrote of a prophecy, a warning that a man of low birth would rise to take his throne. Whether real or invented, the legend spread like fire. Sargon, the gardener's son, was suddenly more than a servant. He was a threat. Urzababa tested him, then feared him. Some claim the king sent Sargon on impossible missions hoping he would die. Others say assassins were ordered to eliminate him quietly, without witnesses. But Sargon survived every attempt, through luck, wits, or fate, and each escape only strengthened the myth forming around him. A man who could not be killed, a man the gods protected. Rumors became storms, and storms reshaped kingdoms. Forced into exile, Sargon fled Kish with nothing but a handful of loyal followers and the will to survive. He wandered across the lands of Akkad, gaining allies among soldiers, farmers, traders, people who saw in him something different from the kings who ruled them. He was not born to power. He earned loyalty through promise and vision. And for the first time in Mesopotamia, people began gathering behind a leader not because of his blood, but because of his strength. The world was changing because of him. With each new follower, Sargon gained another piece of the army he would need to challenge the great cities of his time. Akkadian warriors flocked to him, drawn by the promise of a leader who understood them. He forged relationships built not on lineage, but trust. And slowly, the balance of power began to shift. A rebel faction had taken shape, and at its center, a man who should have died in a river. When the moment finally came, Sargon struck at Kish with decisive force. Urzababa's power, once mighty, crumbled in the face of Sargon's rising tide. Some accounts claim the king fled. Others say he was captured. All agree on one truth. Sargon seized the throne. The gardener's son became the king of Kish, fulfilling the very prophecy that had once threatened his life. But he was not finished. With Kish under his command, Sargon began expanding his influence across the plains of Sumer. The city-states had long fought each other for dominance. Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Uar, none willing to yield. Yet one by one, through battle, diplomacy, and sheer will, Sargon brought them under his rule. He united the Akkadians with the Sumerians, forging bonds where there had only been rivalry. No king before him had dared attempt such a feat, and still he advanced. His armies became disciplined and loyal, following him not merely out of obligation, but devotion. He built new cities, strengthened old ones, and positioned himself as the unifying force the land had never seen. Even his enemies began to speak his name with a mixture of fear and respect. For the first time in history, the idea of a single ruler over many nations was no longer fantasy. It was rising in the dust of Mesopotamia. Sargon's early campaigns reshaped the political landscape. He conquered territories that had stood independent for centuries, bringing their wealth, soldiers, and culture under his growing power. His victories were not just military, they were psychological. Each defeat of a city-state shattered old assumptions that no man could rule more than one kingdom, that the gods would never allow foreign rule, that Sumer would always remain divided. Sargon shattered all of it, and as he carved his way through the ancient world, something new emerged, an idea never seen before: empire. Not a kingdom, not a city, but a realm stretching across many peoples, many languages, many lands. The old world trembled as Sargon forged the foundations of something far larger than any ruler had imagined. The age of city-states was ending. The age of empire had begun. The world watched as Sargon's ambitions grew beyond the borders of Kish. With every conquest, he reshaped the land that had once confined him. His armies marched beneath the Akkadian standard, a symbol that began as a rebellion and was now becoming the emblem of a rising power. And across the Fertile Crescent, city after city felt the tremor of his approach. The question was no longer whether he could rule Mesopotamia, but how far his reach would extend. Sargon understood something no ruler before him had truly embraced: that an empire was more than a chain of victories. It required unity, loyalty, and a system that could sustain power long after a battle was won. As he expanded through Sumer, he appointed trusted officials to govern newly conquered regions, ensuring stability and order. Many were chosen not because of noble birth, but because of skill and faithfulness. This bold new structure tied the realm together with strands stronger than fear. And still he rose. With Sumer united, Sargon looked outward to lands that had once been distant threats. To the east lay Elam, a fierce and ancient kingdom with warriors known for their discipline and brutality. No Mesopotamian king had ever truly subdued them. Yet Sargon marched into Elam with confidence, crushing their armies and bringing their cities under Akkadian dominion. He took their kings hostage, shattered their power, and folded their territories into his growing empire. The victory sent shockwaves across the region. If even Elam could fall, what nation could stand against the Akkadian king? To the west, the kingdoms of Syria and the Levant braced themselves for the storm. Merchants whispered of Sargon's unstoppable advance. Soldiers told stories of battles where he seemed to command both earth and sky, and rulers scrambled to prepare defenses. But Sargon moved with precision and force. City after city fell, their walls breached, their rulers humbled. His army marched all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, a sight no Mesopotamian king had ever witnessed. For the first time in history, a man from the banks of the Euphrates gazed upon the great western horizon and claimed it as part of his realm. The world was changing because of him. At the height of his power, Sargon controlled a vast domain stretching from the mountains of Anatolia to the shores of the Persian Gulf. He commanded trade routes, dictated alliances, and oversaw a system of governance that held together dozens of cultures and languages. His empire was the first of its kind, not merely large, but unified. Sargon had transformed a cluster of warring city-states into a structure the world had never seen. It was a blueprint for every empire that came after. Yet beneath this monumental success, cracks were beginning to form. Ruling an empire was far different from conquering one. distance brought rebellion, wealth attracted rivals. And even as Sargon worked tirelessly to maintain order, old loyalties and ancient grudges resurfaced. Some territories resisted Akkadian rule. Others despised the idea of a foreign king. In Sumer, rebellions ignited like sparks in a dry field. Each uprising forced Sargon to march his armies again, crushing resistance and reasserting his control. But every rebellion came at a cost. Maintaining peace required more soldiers, more resources, more attention than the human body could endure. And still, he persevered. A severe drought fell across Mesopotamia in his later years, destabilizing trade and agriculture. Famine weakened populations, and weakened populations stirred unrest. Enemies who once trembled before Akkad sensed opportunity. The old city-states whispered of freedom, and new challengers emerged at the edges of Sargon's realm. The world that he had united was beginning to strain under its own weight. Yet Sargon refused to yield. Even in his old age, he led campaigns personally, riding at the head of his warriors, proving that the man who rose from nothing would not be undone by chaos. His presence alone could steady a battlefield, and his name was enough to silence dissidents. But time was relentless, and Sargon was mortal. In the twilight of his life, the great king faced his final battles, not against armies, but against the very forces of nature and human ambition that threatened the empire he built. Rebellions surged once more, and Sargon once again crushed them, re-establishing order across his domain. But each victory left him more exhausted, more aware that the world he created needed strength beyond his own. The weight of empire pressed heavily on his shoulders. When Sargon the Great finally died, the world paused. The man who had risen from a riverbank to command the known world was gone. His heirs inherited not just his throne, but the challenges that came with it. His empire, vast and unprecedented, was held together by the force of his will, and now that will was no longer present. The unity he had forged began to fracture. Rivals rose, rebellions intensified, and the empire that seemed unbreakable began its slow descent into turmoil. But as Akkad faltered, Sargon's legend only grew. For generations after his death, rulers invoked his name. Stories of his origins, his conquests, and his empire echoed across Mesopotamia. Even the great kings of Assyria, centuries later, called him their model, their ancestor in spirit, the one who proved that a man could rise above the world of kings and reshape it entirely. His legacy endured long after his empire crumbled. From the fragments of rebellion and dust, a myth emerged. A myth of the man who came from nothing, conquered everything, and carved the idea of empire into human history. From a riverbank child to the world's first emperor, Sargon's shadow still falls across history. Did you enjoy this video? Please support the channel, like, share, and subscribe, so we can bring more forgotten empires back to life.